Okay, so we are going to begin by tabbing our ICD-10 2017 coding book. And in this video, because we don't want them to go too long, we want to keep them short and sweet, we're just going to focus on the tabbing. In the next part of our tabbing the ICD-10 mini-series, we will get into highlighting, sections to pay special attention to, and so on. So just follow along. So if you are following along with me, then hopefully you have plastic tabs like this and this, or anything like that that's your preference. You cannot use paper tabs, so make sure that you don't get those. These are a little more expensive, but they're durable, which is really helpful. So these tabs and a fine point Sharpie, your book, and you're good to go. So if you want to just follow along with me, really we'll just open our books and I'll kind of go through the different sections. So this table of contents is more important than you might think. If you ever can't find anything, if you don't have your entire book tabbed, then this would be where you can locate the different sections. And that's important because for your certification exam, you're really going to want to be able to get to these sections fast. So even though it's a couple of pages in, it might be beneficial for you to tab your table of contents. So I'm going to tab mine. I will go ahead and say I might over tab instead of under tab. I have been that way since I began obtaining certifications. So for each test, I make sure that my book is tabbed overkill. And it's better. I figure it's better to be overkill than underkill. But I'm just going to teach you all the very basics and give you tips and tricks along the way. If you are a student at the Coding Spot, then you have all those additional resources that we offer our current students on our portal. So just table of contents, and however it works for you, make sure that you are tabbing to your preference because you will live in these books, whether you've been coding 6 months or 6 years. Table of contents. I'm just going to point out a couple of things. Your preface, this is really just telling you about ICD-10. So if there's a question on your exam that might ask you, what does ICD-10 stand for, or anything about it, this might be a helpful page. I don't tab it, but I'd like to share that with you. List of features in the book. Scoot this over just a little bit. Practical steps for using the ICD-10 manual. This is really just talking about the structure and formatting and different tips, that's different steps that might help you if you're struggling with something. So I would definitely read this page, but I wouldn't tab it. Now we're at the conventions, and in our next series of videos, we will really get into the nitty-gritty of our conventions, but right now, we're just going to tab it. Your conventions include your formats and structure, your punctuation, notes, your excludes notes, definitions for, as far as ICD-10 goes for and, with, and see also. Basically, a ton of very important stuff is in your conventions. So I would definitely tab conventions. You can tab the side, top, bottom, whatever works for you. What I also like about these tabs is if you want to change the way that they are laid out, they're easy to remove and reapply a few times. We have symbols. So we just looked at our conventions. We just tabbed our conventions, and this is symbols and conventions. I don't personally think that this needs an additional tab, but you have to know that your symbols are in your conventions. So if it's helpful for you, maybe take one of your little tabs, right? Because the way that this certification exam is laid out, you could have a question about conventions, definitely. and it could be about a symbol and what that symbol means. So if you are one of those people like myself that would rather over tab than under tab, you might want to just have a little tab for symbols. See, I'm glad I just said that because it just happened. I had to remove it and reapply it. And now we are at our guidelines, the ICD-10 official guidelines for coding and reporting. Without a doubt, this gets a tab. Now, the ICD-10 guidelines is also available on the cms.gov website. It is available for download PDF, or you can download it and print it off. I have a copy of my guidelines saved on my desktop in PDF version. I have a copy of my guidelines printed that I would carry around and reference and read, and then I use the guidelines in my book. So I know how important the guidelines are for our exam. They're the most important parts of coding, if you ask me. So our ICD-10 guidelines gets a tab. And you might just want to write underneath it to remind yourself that this right here at the beginning is the table of contents. I can't tell you how many of my students might struggle with finding different sections referenced in our practice exams and such in the guidelines, because we, at the coding spot, we provide rationale for our practice exams that reference this section of the guidelines that questions might apply to. So the table of contents is very helpful, but during a test environment, you might be, have anxiety or feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Just go back to your table of contents, because as you can see here, it's a little bit hard to see, I know, but if you're following along, as you can see here, the alphabetic index and tabular list, 7th characters, abbreviations, and with, code also. And if you hop over here just for some different kinds of examples, you see current malignancy versus personal history of malignancy. So if you have a question and you need to reference a guideline, you can come to your table of contents and find where that guideline is. And that's something that 75% of coders or students forget. That's just a statistic I made up, so don't quote me on that, but it seems about right in my experience. So, guidelines, table of contents. And like I said, that's really just to remind you. So I actually would put my guidelines at the top. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. But you make sure that you're tabbing how you like, because these books will be with you for at least a year, right? So now we're in our guidelines, and I don't want to get caught up on this because we have videos covering these sections, and I really want you to make sure that you watch those for the sake of time. We don't want to have an hour video on tabbing your book. We really want to break it up, since most of you are probably following along or making sure that you have the same tabs as we suggest. So these are your guidelines. These are extremely important, and we'll get into tabbing and highlighting the guidelines in our next video. So we will add some tabs in our next video, but just in reference to the guidelines. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over now to page 39. Anatomical illustrations. Now, I do want to say this right off the bat. If you are not using the AAPC coding book, then you might not have a layout the same way. But tabbing of the books applies across the board, right? So the page numbers might be different, or they might be in a different area, but you'll get the general idea. And we are considering, because there's really only 2 books that people use, primarily at least, the Optum version or the AAPC version. So we are considering another video with the Optum, but we'll just see how that goes. So anatomical illustrations, tab. So you can kind of see why we need these big long ones too. And I'll just go ahead and write anatomical for myself, and you can write whatever works for you. Now, as you're going through your practice exams or as you're prepping, whether you're doing a self-study or you're enrolled in a course or you're one of the fortunate and enrolled at the Coding Spot, and if you're not, please come visit us at thecodingspot.com. But as you're going through, studying in your class and your coursework to take your certification exam, you will start to gain a general idea of things that you might need some extra help with. So if there's certain anatomical illustrations that you need extra focus on, make sure you tab it. Because you could have an anatomy question on the heart on your exam in the anatomy section, and you might be able to reference one of your anatomical illustrations and get the correct answer. So it's important to know your books. I've always said that, and whether I'm teaching online or whether I'm teaching in person, the most important thing for a coder to know is their books. And now we are at the index to diseases and injuries. Definitely needs a tab. So let's see, let's go ahead and use index. Oh, I thought there was two there. Again, make sure that you're using plastic tabs because paper tabs are not allowed. You're allowed to write notes in your book, you're allowed to tab your book, highlight your book, but you are not allowed to use paper tabs or to insert paper in your book. So just let me point this out while we're here in the index. It might be a little bit hard to see, but you see these grayed out columns here. And this is something that I really like about this book. It really helps you follow along when you're looking for a diagnosis. So you know when when it's indexed or when it goes in for like a more specified type of the disease you look up, or a different manifestation of the disease you look up. If it is underneath that specific category, they gave us these grayed out columns so we can kind of train our eyes to follow along and not get lost. And you should really focus on that. And if you still have problems looking up codes or getting lost, not going to the correct category and then selecting the code from underneath there, then you can use a ruler too. That's another thing that you can bring to your exam. So after our index to diseases and injuries, and a good thing to also write here is that this is your alphabetic index. And so alpha index right here. And you might want to write that at the top or another tab for it. This is your alphabetic index. So you hear this book, you hear sections in this book, the index, the tabular, the alpha index, and then the tabular. This is the alphabetic index. So I'm going to go ahead and skip through this index. It's giant. There's a lot of different diseases you can have out there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go to 395. Let's see. This is immediately following your alpha index. This is your neoplasm table. So this needs a tab as well. And I'm not really picky about the colors that I use, but I do try to, like, either all the indexes and tabulars or table of contents, use the yellow tabs just to kind of flag your eye. Okay, this is a index. So neoplasms. Neoplasms can be malignant primary, malignant secondary, benign, uncertain, unspecified. In our next section, drugs and chemicals, starts on page 407, table of drugs and chemicals. So this would be a place you could look up a substance, and if you have an accidental poisoning, an overdose, or an assault, which is an intentional poisoning, these are all options you select from after you look up your substance, and you can see that at the top here. Our next section, we're going to go ahead and flip over to the Index to External Causes of Injuries. This is either you love this section or you hate it. I love it, but I know quite a few people that don't like it too much, but it's just so interesting to me to see all the different ways people can injure themselves or get injured. It's absolutely incredible. Pretty much, if you can think of it, there's a code for it. If there's not, they've left plenty of room for expansion in future editions of ICD-10. So I'm sure it will join one of the future versions. But these are, if you see billboards or funny memes, or if you follow us on Twitter at The Coding Spot and you see all our funny little pictures, these are there's a code for that, codes. So they're very interesting to me, but some people, they just drive crazy. And it is kind of complicated to find these codes if you don't know how to look them up. So and you might want to write like external injuries on the top of yours, just so it's quicker to get there, and then put index on the bottom. It's all personal preference. Now we are at our tabular list of diseases and injuries. And so this is, it's personal preference, how you're going to really, want to tab these books. For me, I did it a couple different ways. So I would use the code range, A00 through B99 on a tab. And that's actually how I'm going to show you guys. Another way to do it would be to put chapter 1, infectious diseases and parasitic diseases, or, whatever works for you. I recommend, for test-taking purposes, to make sure that you tab by the code range. And the reason being is when you take your certification exam, one of the biggest obstacles with it, I think, is the time, and making sure you are utilizing every moment of your time that you can, because you think that 5 hours and 40 minutes is a long time. It absolutely flies by. So any place you can save any time is beneficial for you. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and use my little tabs, and I'm just going to go ahead and write A00 through B99. And I'm going to put these guys at the top. So I want to point something else out about this book really quick. All books aren't like this. So for the AAPC books, you can see that they include the guidelines for assigning codes from this chapter. Not only do they include it in where we tabbed our guidelines, but they include the chapter-specific guidelines in front of each chapter. and that's a very valuable tool, right? So you just know that when you are tabbing. So even though we tabbed it right here, the codes really begin right here. Okay, so another thing that's important to know, and this is a tab that we can go ahead and put here, is we're going to go ahead and put volume 1. And volume 1 is important to place a tab for because the ICD-10 has three volumes, right? And whether you are using volume, whether you are coding procedures for an inpatient setting, that would be your volume 3, and that's procedure codes. So most of you are probably taking the CPC exam, and so you are not worried about the PCS or procedure codes, volume 3 of the ICD-10 books, and they don't even include it unless you're specifically request that book and testing for that inpatient coder. So if you're not, then volume 2 and volume 1 and 2 are the only volumes that are located in this book, and they're referred to in the coursework you might be doing and in the test environment often. So the reason you tab it is because it can get confusing because it's out of order, right? So volume 1, let's go ahead and throw that here. Volume 1 is our tabular. It's these colored ends right here. This is our volume 1. Volume 2, and I'm just going to go ahead and take care of that right now. Volume 2 is actually at the beginning of our alphabetic index, right? So we tabbed it, index, but this is volume 2 too. And I strongly recommend that you label this, even if you think you know it or you're flashcarding it, and you probably do know it, just for the test environment, because it can get hectic, just to give yourself every chance. So we've completed that, and the good thing about these chapters is they're color-coded, right? So we know new chapter starts here. Again, guidelines precede the actual codes, and we can go ahead and code our code range here. The code range is always listed down here. Like I said, really the reason that I'm tabbing it like this is just for speed. So this code range is C00 through D49. I do get a little particular about my top tabs. Okay, so this is our Neoplasm chapter. And like I said, we'll really get into the highlighting and what to pay careful attention to for your exam once we get into the future videos. So this is just tabbing the book. And we're going to go ahead and do code range D50 through D89. And this is our diseases of the blood and blood-forming organs and disorders involving the immune mechanism. Oops. Next is chapter 4, endocrine, nutritional, and metabolic diseases, diabetes, malnutrition, morbid obesity. So we have code range E00 through E89. Our next code range, F01 through F99. And again, you might just want to tab your chapters, chapter 5, mental, behavioral, and neurodevelopmental disorders. Maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe that works best for you, and that's fine. Just make sure that you're tabbing your chapters in some way. And you might do both, which is what honestly I do. So And I did say I over tab. At least I've been told that. I think I tab just right. After all, I have passed all of my certifications exams, so you might want to follow in my footsteps. Or you could be a different type of learner and you know what works for you. So G00 through G99, diseases of the nervous system. And you know, after this video, I'm definitely going to go through and line these up perfectly. And we have H00 through H59 code range. And, you know, these are called the code categories, these 3 digits. Remember, guidelines proceed. And you can see through your book, there's all kinds of different different tools in your books. And like I said, we'll really get into that in future videos. Knowing where to find them is the key. Chapter 8, diseases of the ear and mastoid process, H60 through H95. Chapter 9, circulatory. And the nice thing about the exam, if you're taking the AAPC exam, is that you know exactly the structure of the exam you're taking. So you know that it will go in a specific order, your exam. For example, you'll have, you know, a section on ICD10, and then a section on guidelines, anatomy, and when you get into the CPT coding, you'll know exactly, you know, the 10,000 category codes. You will know you have 10 of those, and they will be on the exam in a specific order. So AAPC is nice in sharing the order of the questions on the exam and exactly how many will be in each topic. So. Respiratory, diseases of the respiratory, J00 through J99, asthma, COPD. Here. Diseases of the digestive system. We have K00 through K95. L00 through L99, diseases of the skin and subcutaneous tissue. This is like your ulcers, your pressure ulcers, psoriasis. Musculoskeletal system and connective tissue, code range M00 through M99. It's a big chapter. Chapter 14, N00 through N99. Your UTIs, well, not your UTIs, but UTIs, they are in this section. Chapter 15, pregnancy, childbirth, code range O00 through O9A. And this chapter has a lot of very specific, important guidelines. So It's very important that you know guidelines in all your chapters. This one has some really particular ones. Certain conditions originating in the perinatal period. So this also has very particular coding guidelines. They all do, really. These just jump out at me. P00 through P96. I'm getting to the end, so just hold on a little bit longer. We have chapter 17, congenital malformations, deformations, and chromosomal abnormalities is Q codes. And Q also has very particular guidelines. Really, all the chapters do. So, very important to know your guidelines. Chapter 18, signs, symptoms, and abnormal clinical and laboratory findings not elsewhere classified. R00 through R99. So these are our signs and symptoms. Often if you have a sign and symptom documented and it's an integral part of a disease process, you wouldn't code it by itself. It would just be included in that more specific disease. These are signs and symptoms are pretty, they're not very specific. They lack specificity, but you still capture them if they're documented and coded. But these codes, you always want to make sure you don't have a more specified code documented or a diagnosis documented in the record. Chapter 19, injury, poisoning, and certain other consequences of external causes. S00 through T88. Oops. This is a really big chapter because all kinds of things are in here. Fractures, complications, all kinds of stuff. So let's see. External causes of morbidity. V00 through Y99. Remember that external cause index that we tabbed at the very beginning. So these are codes that go along with that. Specific guidelines too. This is like, let's see, contact with a metal drilling machine, initial subsequent encounter. There's all kinds of crazy codes out there. Chapter 21, factors influencing health status and contact with health service, AKA our Z codes. I like Z codes too. Some people can't stand them. I like them. Z codes could be, there's all different kinds of Z codes, but you know, it can be a status code, an encounter for a screening code. There's Z codes for vaccinations, all kinds of stuff. Isn't that amazing that we have just enough orange tabs? Okay, so now we're at our appendixes. And our appendixes in our ICD-10, they can be helpful too. So, for example, this appendix, Appendix A, Z codes for long-term use of drugs. So there's a Z code for long-term, Z codes for long-term use of different types of drugs. For example, long-term use of anticoagulants. There's a specific code if somebody is on anticoagulants that we document that with a Z code. It's a long-term use code. So why this appendix is helpful, and you're definitely going to want to label it, let's go ahead and label our appendix with blue, is because these listed drugs here, they list the brand name drug and the generic drug equivalent, right? These are the different types of anticoagulants. So, you know, many of us are coders without any clinical background. Some of us are nurse coders or MAs that become coders, or even providers that become coders. But many of us coders don't have any clinical background, so we might not recognize one of these drugs and realize that, hey, this is an anticoagulant. I need to make sure I capture that long-term use code. So that's why this is helpful. So Appendix A, and I'm just going to go ahead and put long-term use of drugs. Since I have a lot of room on my tab, I'll just write Z codes down here. Overkill, overkill. Let's go ahead and put that there. So appendix, you can see how many that we have, right? Long-term use of contraceptives, long-term use of bisphosphonates. No, I know I mispronounced that, but some of these I don't even know. Next appendix, Appendix B, codes as first listed diagnosis. So the following Z codes can only be reported as the principal or first listed diagnosis, except when there are multiple encounters on the same day and the medical records for the encounters are combined, right? That's the only time. So these diagnoses, in plain English, they are going to be sequenced on a claim, or even whenever you're coding, they'll be sequenced as first listed diagnoses, right? So they'll have to go in the first position of coding. That's also called the principal diagnosis for inpatient records, right? So either the principal diagnosis or the first listed diagnosis. That's all that these Z codes can be. This can be helpful. So say you have an exam question, or you're taking your test and a question comes up on your exam, and the only difference is maybe the positioning of the sequencing of one of these Z codes. You could flip back to this Appendix B. You could see if one of them might only be able to be the first listed diagnosis, and then you could select your answer. So Appendix B. First listed / principal. DX is an abbreviation for diagnosis only. The more you know your books, the better off you'll be. Appendix C, deleted codes. I don't really need to tab this. I wouldn't suggest that you necessarily need to tab it either. Just know that it's here. Codes are deleted every year for a couple different reasons. Maybe they make a more specified code and don't need an unspecified code anymore. Appendix D is symbol for 7-character codes. So this is just, and you really learn more about this as you're learning your guidelines, but these are just when you have a symbol for 7-character code. So they might need a placeholder for future expansion. So I wouldn't necessarily tab this, but you need to know where it is as well. One thing I do like about this is it does list complication or comorbidity codes, CC codes, and this is important, really important for inpatient coding as well. So it's really listing all of the codes that fall under the complication or comorbidity definition. And it's based on CMS data. So you can actually go to the CMS website, which I love, and look up the different CCs, complication or comorbidities, and what it means, and learn a little bit more about it. And that's important, you know, for coding inpatient records primarily, or SNFs, or long-term acute facilities. Complications or comorbidities, major complications or comorbidities. So this again is really CC, MCC exclusions. This really is applying for inpatient coding and DRG selection. So DRG selection is how you typically, an inpatient claim gets paid using the DRG methodology. So diagnosis-related grouping. That's what a DRG stands for. And you really don't need to know that now, but it's important just to know that kind of stuff for your coding career. Hospital-acquired conditions. This is another section in Appendix D. And, you know, I didn't tab it, Appendix C or D, but you might just want to tab it for speed in case a question does reference Appendix D. So we should just go ahead and actually place a tab. Remember, I'm an over-tabber, so you might never, ever in your entire life use Appendix D. But I would just tab it Appendix D because there's so much included here, like these hospital-acquired conditions, which you hear commonly referred to as hacks. And hacks are really important right now, and they have been for a while, but more so now. Here's Appendix D, because there are certain hospital-acquired conditions released by CMS that CMS is instructing, and different payers and different facilities are instructing, this is a hospital-acquired condition. We are not responsible to pay for this. Does that mean that the patient pays for it? No. It means that the hospital is responsible for the cost which resulted from a hospital-acquired condition. And not all conditions you might think would be a hospital-acquired condition is on here, like hospital-acquired pneumonia. That's actually not a hack that gets reported the same way, but it is still the hospital-acquired, right? So there's a specific list that CMS releases, and that's what payers and different in Medicare and Medicaid, which they follow. That was a bunch of additional information. You also have these notes pages in your book. Definitely make sure that different things that you learn, you're writing notes in your book, so you can write notes, whatever notes you want in your book. So that is tabbing our ICD-10. If you had an ICD-10 book with the PCS procedure codes too, that would be volume 3, and it would follow the other volumes. So this obviously isn't an ICD-10 CM PCS book, and unless you're taking your CP certified, CIC certified inpatient coder credential, then you probably won't be using your PCS unless you end up becoming a hospital coder too. So there you go. I want to say please subscribe to our channel, YouTube channel, The Coding Spot, because we will have tons of helpful videos, most of them a little bit shorter than this, and we would love to have you follow us. So we also have a Twitter, The Coding Spot, and our website, thecodingspot.com. Visit us, and thank you for watching.